Why is it that in a series with such powerful characters, characters that control lightning, energy, explosions, time itself, that a character first presented to control nothing is the most interesting and thought-provoking character in not only the series, but in media itself? Let's find out. Say what you want about UnOrdinary, however, I will always 100% believe that UnOrdinary is the best example of morally gray characters, especially with our main character, John Doe. To quickly explain, UnOrdinary takes place in a world where superpowered people are the norm, from lightning manipulation to energy blasts to barriers and time manipulation. How is that fair? We follow the students of Wellston High School, specifically our two leads, Serafina and John. I've talked a lot about John, mainly because he's just so easy to talk about. Let me explain. John starts the series as a crippled, powerless, while everyone has their supernatural gifted abilities. John doesn't, and because of that, he's at the bottom. You see, Wellston and basically the entire world operates under the hierarchy. The strongest will rise to the top. Those who are on a similar level will compete with each other, and the weakest will cower in the shadows. And like the hierarchy, there are those who are at the very top and those at the very bottom. John being at the bottom. For 50 straight episodes, we see and sympathize with John, seeing him get beat down and bullied by just about everyone. From the king of Wellston and his best friend, to low-level and forgettable bullies that I totally didn't forget the name of that one time. However, that's just it. John is at the bottom by choice. He actually isn't a cripple. He has a power, a super cool ability known as aura manipulation. That literally took me 20 minutes to explain, but his ability makes him one of the strongest members of the school. But why did John say he was a crippled? It all ties back into John's past. Now, the reason John is so interesting is how he changes throughout the story, and more importantly, how that change feels believable. John was an actual crippled when he was a kid. He had no ability and was constantly bullied because of it. And while he would gain friends because of his low status, he was angry at the world. Understandably, the people with powers sucked, and they always showed off their power to those weaker than them, including John and his friends. John didn't think it was fair, so when John discovered his ability, he could finally fight back, and he does fight back, constantly fighting back too much. He was slowly turning into the bullies that he hated so much, showing no mercy, hurting those who would simply look at him funny, fighting for no reason sometimes. And his strength and power would continue to rise and rise, becoming strong enough to be a royal, the king of his school, becoming the thing he hated the most. So much so that his friends tried multiple times to reason with him, but failed to get through to him. After time in basically a one-sided fight between John and a literal massive group of people, John was suspended and given readjustment classes. 4 months. He was locked in a room with a man who would make him relive his mistakes over and over and over again. Relive when he would hurt his friends, relive the fact that he was a monster. After these classes, John was broken. He believed that his powers were a curse, believed he wasn't worthy of anything. So when he entered Wellston, he joined as a cripple. Feeling like he was a monster, he didn't want to hurt anyone else. He stayed away from most people, only accidentally becoming friends with Serafina, the strongest member of the school and the queen of Wellston at the time. John is a roller coaster of a character, always on one side or the other, the powerless or the powerful. And both of these sides really connect with the idea of a character who rises and falls. Too often we're led to believe that a main character should be noble, pure, heroic, other words that mean emotionally perfect. I think these characters have their place. However, their place nowadays is too often. John is a really good case study on the opposite of these characters, a likable character with emotional flaws. You see, John is strong. That aspect doesn't really change. Every time John uses his powers, he proves that to us. From the first time we see it to the most recent time, John's physical strength and his ability strength are never in question, which is the polar opposite to many characters we see in anime and TV shows of a similar status. They're always training and such, always trying to be the best they can be. And I do like that message, that you can become the best through hard work and dedication, but it becomes boring. since the most interesting part of a character now becomes their fight scenes. John's struggle is his strength, but the fact that he's too strong. The beginning of the series is a really good example of John's first solution to the problem. He gives control to others, something he would have hated before. Here he's on the rise. He doesn't threaten, he's not brutal here, he's not a bully. Meanwhile, John starts to change after an encounter with Arlo, because his mentality and emotional side are still flawed. John is too used to putting people into two categories, good guys or bad guys. It's something we all do, something I definitely did with my first video on John. But that mentality causes John's mindset to shift, no longer holding back because he views others' actions as evil, and therefore deserving of the brutality he showed before. This shift is John's fall, as I put it. John's decline starts here. Many people think it starts later, but here he's finally getting revenge, finally punishing those who've hurt him. But that's both the problem and what's so interesting. John at this moment is slowly changing back into the person he was before. Notice his text bubble. It changes to a black bubble with white text, the inverse of his speech before. You see, most stories need stakes, consequences, the results of the action. These stakes are what keep us interested and involved. Stakes are what keep tension up. Now, what we get wrong about stakes is that they don't always have to be life or death. Too often in action, superhero type content, the stakes are always life or death. And while the mentality of those stakes is solid, high risk, high reward, it's overused. It feels played out. The only way to keep those stakes actually interesting is to make a series where the main characters actually die. That way the audience knows your stakes are a real possibility. If not, you can do what UnOrdinary does. I can count on one hand the time stakes in UnOrdinary are life or death, and that's a good thing. They're spread out often enough that they don't feel overused. Not to mention the fact that the series is quite brutal in itself, They're not afraid to stray away from violence. Instead, however, the stakes are different and almost always connected back to John. Now, something important to note is that stakes don't always have to be the result of a battle, and John's aren't always, depending on how you look at it. You see, John's stakes are present ever since episode 3. His stakes have always been an internal battle. The idea that he has to win over the evil and merciless side to him. Every battle you can definitely see a shift in him. It becomes harder and harder for him to win this internal struggle. John doesn't choose to be crippled every day because it's easy. He chooses it because he'd rather get beaten down every day than confirm the fact that he's a monster. And that battle presses on, and the best part? He loses. The stakes here are real, not because they feel realistic or possible, but because they actually happen. Because John here loses, the stakes happen, John changes, even if it's slowly, because John loses the internal battle. And every time he fights someone else, every time someone tries to bully him, he becomes worse and worse and worse, slowly falling back into the king mentality. And here's where the stakes become way more interesting, because here, John is basically the villain after this. Since he becomes the obstacle, the stakes only apply if he wins, especially as the Joker. Whenever royals fight John under the guise of the Joker, they're the ones that have to deal with the fallout, the consequences. To a certain extent, John becomes the villain during the second half of season 1 and the first half of season 2. And that's actually really cool. Look, many of you might love John. I love John. But if it became hard to root for John during these moments, that's because it was supposed to be hard to root for John during these moments. Yes, John struggles. Yes, John was just getting revenge. And yes, John wanted to tear down a system that left him with broken bones every week. But he was not a good person during it. Not many stories deal with this kind of thing because it's difficult and definitely causes some backlash. Is it hard to root for John because of his actions? That's the point. You're supposed to understand where John comes from, sympathize with his cause, but not root for him. I mean, look at some of the things he does. When you're writing a story, it's easy to make the characters feel stagnant. Not because you're not developing them, but because it's all rise. What I mean by that is it's always a slope upwards. They're always getting better. That's nice, sure. But if you want to make a character interesting, give them stakes, make their actions believable, sure, awesome. However, don't always put them in the right. It doesn't always lead to the most loved characters, but always leads to a memorable character. I've made 6 videos talking about John directly, and those don't even count the ones I mentioned him in. John is such an interesting character because of his complexity. When making a story, especially one that's meant to be thought-provoking, don't be afraid to make characters like John. Characters that are simultaneously heroes and villains. Because that's when we get the best characters in media. Don't you agree? That's all for today. Take care.